Introducing myself, my name is Thomas Zhang, and I'm the head of the Greater China Analysis at Userbase, which is the Japanese business intelligence firm headquartered in Tokyo and listed on the Tokyo Stock Exchange. I personally am leading a team of 8 analysts across Shanghai and Tokyo, and we do a lot of industry and macro analysis across the Greater China region. So our guest today, and with whom I'm going to have this fireside chat, is Phil Chen. As Kenny just briefly mentioned, he is currently the decentralized chief officer at the HTC, the Taiwanese consumer electronics giant. He joined HTC in 2007, and during his tenure there, HTC shipped the world's, if you still remember, the world's first Android phone and the 3G, 4G, and GPS phone. He also led the acquisition of Beats and led the first Facebook phone product, helped grow HTC from a 2 billion to 35 billion market cap company during his tenure. Actually, apart from being a corporate executive, Phil is also a seasoned investor himself. He is currently the general partner at Raise Capital and sits on the board of several companies across the world, including those headquartered in Silicon Valley, London, New York, New Zealand, Israel. He received his BA and BS of mathematics and physics from the University of California in San Diego. So thanks for joining us today, Phil, and thanks for your time. The topic we're given today is about Southeast Asia. Now, you've been traveling and working quite extensively throughout in the region throughout your career. Perhaps so let's start probably with the most watched event in the past week or so, the US general election. Now, it now looks increasingly likely that Joe Biden will be the next US president. We all know that President Trump has actually changed very dramatically the global manufacturing supply chains in the past 4 years through things like bringing factories back to the US or starting trade wars with not only China, but also North America and European countries. Now, if you imagine Biden in the White House starting from next year, how do you think that will change the supply chain landscape in the Southeast Asian region?
Well, I think, at HTC, the product in which I kind of look over, which is the Exodus, which is a blockchain phone that empowers the users to own their private keys. It's really a phone that's centered around privacy. I would say I'm most interested not so much on the supply chain side of how that will change, but how much the big technology companies will now be regulated. I think of companies, because of the Exodus phones, we deal a lot with, people, privacy, and people's data. And the big companies like Facebook or, Google, I think the most interesting thing moving forward is how countries and how companies and how individuals are going to handle their data. And so I do think that, this new president-elect Biden, that's going to happen, and I'm really curious to see how Southeast Asian or Asian governments will start to handle these kind of this data trade, so to speak, because all of these big companies, whether it's Facebook or Google or even Grab or Uber, how do we adjudicate between kind of users' data, what's government's data, how will that be mined? To me, and how kind of the United States kind of take the lead on regulating these companies, I think is the most, for me, is the most pressing question, given that the EU has taken the lead with GDPR and things of that nature. I think it will have a huge effect on how these big giant companies are regulated.
Yeah, I think if you mention about these data privacy or regulation issues, because as we all know, Southeast Asian the region is actually quite segmented with many countries with many different rules and regulations. For example, we all know that Thailand previously used to have some rules, particularly for Facebook, because of these youth movements. And if you talk about that, how do you think this sort of regulation would play differently across the different countries in the Southeast Asian region, like Thailand or Vietnam or Malaysia, Singapore? I'm pretty sure these countries will have different rules. How do you think about that?
I just think that countries like India, for example, they resisted the free basics by Facebook, right? And I do see that, and that product is basically, if you get a mobile phone, using data to surf Facebook will be free, right? I think countries are getting much more educated, especially recently with Netflix, with the documentary film The Social Dilemma. Over 50 million people have watched this film, and people are much more aware about what is free. Doesn't mean free, right? A free product just means that the person consuming the product becomes the product, right? And so I think it will be really interesting for countries like Vietnam, which Facebook has a huge foothold in Vietnam, where countries how the governments will respond, now that things like people are getting more educated about social dilemma. People are understanding how, especially what we learned with the 2016 election, how Russians were able to, play a role in which government official was being elected. It becomes, a very sensitive issue when it comes to being able to tap into Facebook, being such a powerful advertising and distribution content machine. Everything from political ads to selling you products to understanding algorithms that make users more predictable. I don't think any country, anybody has answers to these yet, but I think with the president-elect Biden, I think these questions will be brought at the forefront. And because of that, other countries will start seeing that, hey, the data of our citizens are actually very valuable, and then hence the government will start, understanding what does it mean to tax, Facebook using Facebook, where they have a lot of users, say in Thailand or in Vietnam, all these users are our citizens, and you're making money off of that, how should that be taxed, right? I think in the coming months, even years, this will be a big question.
Well, thanks for that. I think you brought up and you mentioned India, which is quite interesting because the region we're supposed to cover today is Southeast Asia. And when discussing about Southeast Asia, few people would naturally think about as far as India. But I think you do brought up a very interesting and important issue here, because given what's happened just a few months ago between India and, say, China, the regional tensions brought up by various geopolitical reasons, of course, but then lots of companies in the tech industries in both countries, they have been thrown into this turmoil, and they have been greatly impacted, including some of the Chinese tech companies who has already had actually quite big operations in India. So what's your view on that? I mean, if you brought up India particularly, then how will that impact, say, China's, or not only China's, maybe US's tech giants operation in India in the future?
I just think that, I don't know how this particular TikTok thing will turn out, but I think what's clear is that this thing we call the internet is being more and more firewalled. And it's going to be more and more, not just the internet, it's going to be a world of intranets, basically, right? China has its own intranet. The US has its own intranet. And I think Southeast Asia countries, whether it's Vietnam, Thailand, or Indonesia, these are big populations, especially Indonesia. There's no reason why they will have a say in this, right? We have, some hundreds of millions of citizens using a particular social network. I think big internet companies are coming out of Singapore, are coming out of Indonesia, are coming out of Southeast Asian countries. I think they'll have a big say in terms of, how, what does a bordered internet mean, right? And, I think, whether it's, China has always been firewall. China has always, protected its own internet companies. I think the US, just beginning, I don't know how now that Biden, the president-elect, most likely will take the White House, how he will regulate tech companies not from the U.S. that are taking a lot of mind share from U.S. citizens. How that will be regulated. But yeah, I do think that in Southeast Asia, in such a big region, each country can they don't have to follow any of precedents, say, from the big countries. I think that's the beauty of the internet, right? Each country can make their own decisions about how to manage their own citizens' data and how they use this incredible tool.
Well, thanks for that. I think throughout the whole 2020, we're coming to the end of this year, there's one particular topic that no one can avoid, which is the coronavirus pandemic. Many say that this pandemic has profoundly changed the way companies work and operate in many ways, including, of course, lots of tech companies. Industries that rely very heavily on people's interactions have been severely hit: tourism, aviation, food and catering. But on the other hand, many tech companies, which actually benefit from people's social distancing and working from home, have been doing very well, like Zoom that we're using now, and cloud computing, gaming, online meetings. So what's your view on this pattern, and how this pattern is playing out, particularly in the Southeast Asia? As you just mentioned, Southeast Asia is a very populous region with 600, 700 million people across the region. And how is the pandemic going to change the business across this region, in your view?
I think with the pandemic, there's more and more activities will become virtual, such as this virtual conference. We invested in a company called Wave that does virtual concerts. Obviously we're using Zoom for virtual workplaces. And I think a lot more software tools will be built around, how do we connect people in the workplace and play and entertainment through software, right? And so this goes back to the question of people's data. It makes that even more important as our lives, our work lives, our leisure lives, our everyday lives become more and more digital and more virtual. It's a big deal which company is managing that connection and that relationship, right? It makes a big deal if, say, in Vietnam, they have their own Zoom, or not. How that connection and where that data is streamed to, with which server and which country. It makes those decisions and regulation decisions even more important, right? Because as more and more of the citizens, the 600 million people region that you just said, how is their data, how is their digital lives being managed, right? And if this 600 million people region is being managed by a company say in China or in US, that means they control the connections. They control what content is being surfaced. They control who gets to talk to who, right? And so that becomes, of critical importance how to start thinking about, regulation around this. So, I keep talking about regulation, and usually as an entrepreneur,
I was just about to mention that you keep mentioning regulation so much. Yeah.
Yeah, as an entrepreneur, usually you don't want regulation, right? But I think in this particular case, it's heavily needed to talk about how data is being managed. Yeah, I think again mentioning the not just Social Dilemma on Netflix, but The Great Hack. There's going to be many more of these examples and documentaries that people will see that help them understand how much they're giving up, by not paying attention to this, by not, lobbying governments to regulate this conversation.
Sure. I mean, given your very extensive experience across so many countries in the Southeast, many times about regulation, can you share with us some of your own personal experience, like when you're traveling through the region, and what kind of experience do you have, like once crossing the border and you enter into another set of regulation? How has that sort of scenario impacted on your own personal behavior? For example, maybe as I know, like many people now these days traveling to China, they will simply have another mobile phone because China's internet, as you just said, is a completely different one. So have you had any similar personal experience when you travel across the different countries in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, well, when you go
any
to,
interesting ones to share with us?
Yeah, I guess the obvious one is going to Singapore and you want to get, instead of Uber or Lyft, you're using Grab, right? And Grab is heavily localized. You get paid by cash. It's much more flexible, right? They work with local fleets. And that app is only used in certain regions that you are, right? When I go to the US, there's you use Uber or you use Lyft, right? These are all big, or Google Maps, right? In China, you use, Baidu Maps, or, some other completely different service. And it just goes to show that, every country has, it's becoming more and more of a collection of intranets. Every country having its own kind of social network, its own service. And so, yeah, I think that's the experience. I think many people experience that, right? Many people experience just, going to a different country and experiencing, a completely different set of apps, from social networking to ride sharing to even the browser, right? Which again goes back to how important, these algorithms are, because, if you were to pick up just my wife's Facebook feed and I opened it, it wouldn't be interesting at all, right? Because what she sees is completely different from what I see, right? It's completely different from what you see, Thomas, right? I mean, I think not only the apps on your phone are completely different, but even if we use the same app, the experience, the content is completely different too, right? Which implies that these big companies have the ability of mass surveillance and, mass kind of manipulation of anybody's psychology, and decide on what content you see, who you can talk to. So, yeah, I think all of us have similar experiences when we cross borders.
So how do I mean, you as a seasoned entrepreneur and a tech executive, how do you deal with that? I mean, do you see any ways forward to get everything integrated, or in the future that, especially in a region as various as Southeast Asian region, we're just going to be living with this fact that, okay, it's a segmented market, including the internet, including the online world, which is also segmented.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, I think one of the things that we built is, we're the only company or the only phone that allows someone to own their private key. And this private key is protected by hardware. And no third party owns this private key, right? And so the idea is that, and we need partners to help build software around this, but the idea is that anything that goes in or out of this phone is encrypted by this private key that only you own, right? And so, we can only build something that starts from the individual, right? If the individual starts caring about their own data, then they will use this phone and find apps. There are many apps like DuckDuckGoose or Signal, or Proton Mail for email, that is protected by, using end-to-end encryption. But if they use our phone, they'll be even further encrypted because it's a key used to encrypt any data going in and out. But this key is protected by hardware. And so, I agree kind of in the general sense that, is the game over in terms of, people's data is going to be mined anyways? Yeah, I probably agree with that. I think countries like Estonia, for example, they're kind of the more progressive, they have, kind of e-citizenships, ID cards kind of being more digitized. And they've kind of said, hey, we have to concede to the fact that our world has become digital and all our data will be, it is no longer private, right? But at least from a government standpoint, when they're going to use somebody's data, they're going to be very transparent about how it's being used, right? And I think moving forward, I think that's certainly one solution from a regulation standpoint. But at least for what we're doing is we're just empowering the individual to start owning this technology, this tool set, for example, to be able to encrypt their data, right? We're not reinventing the wheel in terms of cloud infrastructure, right? We're just adding this particular private key that anything that goes out into the cloud, at least you can encrypt it, some minimal protection. So it's not even talking about data ownership, by the consumer. It really is just some level of encryption and protection of one's own data.
Right, thanks for that very, very insightful technology and briefing. And I think there's another topic that I'd like to have your insight is on, the pandemic, which is very unfortunate throughout this whole year, has hit people's earnings power quite heavily throughout the region. While governments across the world, have thrown vast stimulus packages at it, like the zero or near zero, even negative interest rates. So in light of this, where do you think companies looking for the growth in the future in the region of the Southeast Asia? Any perspective on that?
I would just kind of talk about Taiwan a bit, right? Taiwan, of course, is the anomaly. Taiwan is, probably the country that has handled the pandemic, one of the best countries, or if not the best country that has controlled the pandemic very well. And, when the government has done this, what's happened is you see this kind of reverse brain drain going on, right? I think for the past 10, 20 years, you see Taiwan tech and the best talent going abroad, whether it's China or US or Southeast Asia, to work in tech companies. And now, because of how well the government has handled the pandemic, all these people are coming back to Taiwan now. There's a group of people in Silicon Valley, that have built companies, that have sold companies, and now they're moving back to Taiwan, and there's this incredible new energy and new startup kind of innovation energy going on in Taiwan. And so, you know, I mean, I'm just pointing out that when a government, you know, makes these changes or is able to, you know, implement something of this scale, you know, it'll attract the best talent, you know, and in this particular case, it's handling the pandemic. But I think what will be also really be interesting again is, you know, when a government makes, you know, a sound government decisions around how companies' data will be managed, you know, the same thing will happen. You know, talent will swarm, will come, you know, towards good governance. And so, yeah, I see Taiwan as a great example of great government decisions that attract a lot of talent. You know, I hope to see that in other regions in Southeast Asia too.
People and companies going back to Taiwan from other regions, and maybe from the perspective of HTC, as where you work as a senior executive, do you see lots of similar supply chain readjustments moving around in the region, not only maybe coming out of China to the Southeast Asia, but maybe back to, you see, Taiwan and even Korea or Japan?
Not at the moment. I haven't seen that much of a change. I've seen expansion and explorations, but not actual movement yet on the supply chain side.
Okay, sure. Thanks for that. I mean, time now is, thanks for all the insight inputs. I guess we're coming to the time of the Q&A. We have about roughly 10 minutes for Q&A. And I'm now looking at some of the questions that have been posed to you. There's one interesting one about, how about this one? Do you think Southeast Asia will take over China as world's mobile economy hotspot? So what's your view on that? And Southeast Asia versus China on the mobile economy?
Yeah, it depends what you mean by take over. I think, you know, China is so, you know, a massive economy that, you know, there's a reason why companies like Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, and Toutiao, and, you know, Meitu, you know, why these companies are so big, right? I think Southeast Asia can build their own kind of internet companies. The question is, you know, and China has yet to prove this too, right? China has yet to prove, you know, other than TikTok, right, has yet to prove that an internet company from China can go global, right? And so I do think that any Southeast Asian mobile internet company has the same opportunity. You know, Grab, of course, has a great opportunity to go beyond Southeast Asia. So yeah, I think that, you know, being such a region, you know, understanding kind of the local nuances is a good opportunity to for Southeast Asia countries to kind of own their own internet or own their own intranet. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting, because there's another question coming up, I think is actually a follow-up, can be viewed as a follow-up one to your previous answers. Is you mentioned about Chinese tech companies going global or expand to outside China. And this question, this is, many Chinese companies have recently anchored their international base in Singapore, particularly in Singapore. So what do you think of that? And what it means for Singapore or Southeast Asia as a business or tech hub in the region? So I guess the question is about Chinese companies going global, but then choosing Singapore as a hub or base.
I don't know. I think Singapore is a fairly small country, so it's they're able to control a lot of things much more tightly. And I think Singapore has a lot of experience in hosting Western big tech companies and now hosting new big China companies. It's um, uh, I guess the question of what to do with Singaporean citizen data is not that big of a question because of the population being that small. Singapore is known for being very much a cosmopolitan city and hosting uh, companies in many different countries, right, and setting up shop. It's been very friendly in that sense. So I think Singapore is wouldn't be the example because the conditions are just completely different from other Southeast Asian countries like in Indonesia or Vietnam or Thailand with big populations that have different standards in terms of hosting foreign companies in their region. So yeah, I think Singapore is unique in that sense.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you obviously have dealt personally with lots of Chinese tech, either giants or startups. I mean, you mentioned about Singapore being unique, and do you, in your view or in your communications with these Chinese companies, what do you think are the main drivers or reasons for these Chinese companies to opt Singapore vis-a-vis other countries like Thailand or Malaysia in the region?
Can you rephrase that and say it again?
The reason or the main driver behind these Chinese companies' expansion or setting hubs in Singapore, why do they prefer Singapore to other Southeast Asian countries, in your view?
Well, I think it's the same reason why U.S. companies set up shop in Singapore, right? Singapore has always been that kind of hub where hosting Amazon to Facebook to Microsoft. I think Singapore has a lot of lawyers that they're very I guess attuned to kind of legal operations and how a tech company should be managed in this region. Yeah, I think the combination of U.S. companies that with that experience and having a lot of lawyers protecting that, they have that experience.
That's an interesting observation. Okay, I think we've got another one here. Phil, are you okay there?
I think Phil is on mute. Phil, you may need to unmute.
Phil,
Okay.
are you okay there?
Great. Yeah.
Okay, sure. Right. Okay. There's another question here. It's a slightly more macro. From your perspective, how will Trump's trade war affect the ASEAN bloc? I guess it's the 10 countries formed as the organization called ASEAN. Southeast Asia has been a very big driver for good, many would say. And in terms of making trade easier, do you agree to that? So I guess to rephrase the question is the ASEAN or the Southeast countries actually have been a very good force in driving global trade. And what's your view on that?
How's the Trump trade wars?
Yeah. How does the Trump trade wars affect the ASEAN bloc?
I don't have a clear view on this. I mean, it certainly has a huge effect. I just, I don't have a specific example in mind. Yeah.
Okay, sure. Let's get another one then. It's quite general, I think, this one. Do you think we're currently in a tech bubble. I guess this is not only referring to China or Southeast Asia, but more generally on a global basis. So are we in a tech bubble right now?
Tech bubble meaning tech companies being overvalued. In that sense, no, I don't think we're in a tech bubble. I think tech still has a lot of growth. I think tech is getting, has become mainstream now, and will continue to expand into spaces where we normally don't see, from fintech to education to to health, normal places that again need a lot more regulation, but tech hasn't been able to penetrate into, right? If you look at where tech has succeeded in the past, I don't know, 10, 20 years, it's because those spaces haven't been regulated, right? And in heavier regulated spaces, whether it's finance or health, even education, you're starting to see tech companies kind of break through that barrier now. And so there's still a lot of growth that will happen.
So the answer is no, not in a tech bubble. Okay, there's another quite macro one. I guess this is referring to Southeast Asia, of course. What does the future hold for one of the world's fastest evolving consumer markets? So the world's fastest evolving consumer markets, referring to Southeast Asia. What does the future hold? I guess this is the question from the perspective of talking about consumer.
I think it's really promising. It's really exciting to see what's going to happen in this region, right? I do think that this region is big and smart enough and informed enough to make their own decisions. So yeah, I think it's hugely promising.
On the tech side, this region for the tech, that's your area, I mean. Hello. Hi,
yes.
Phil.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. For the Southeast Asia, how about the tech, the prospect for the tech? Maybe on one sentence, because we are coming to the end of this session.
Yeah, I just find it very promising. I think that there's a huge opportunity for Southeast Asia to own its own internet. Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's the end of this session. We're on that and ending the session on that quite promising note for Southeast Asia. So thanks a lot, Phil, for your time. Nice chatting with you. And I'll hand it back over to Kenny.